Thanks everyone for joining our fifth on the offense session. I'm David Foster, BVR, calling from New York this time. And I'm joined by Nick Fallon, who is a high energy, spectacular person with an amazing content publishing background. I think many of you on this call have met Nick in various formats before, but besides being with Collingwood Advisory, which is doing a lot of interesting stuff internationally and particularly in the UK, Nick's background is inspirational, particularly from a strategy point of view, because he's had the good fortune, I guess you'd say, you can correct me, Nick, on the worst use of the word good, but the good fortune to work with Informa, the Economist, BSI, Thomson Scientific, and so some of the leading names in international content publishing during periods of intense transition. And he's, I think, been right at the forefront to see the different strategies people have used to try to get through those situations. So that the opportunity to talk to Nick has been spectacular for me. And I think quickly we can share some of the highlights of what he's seeing in the changes now. And Nick, you can correct anything I said that sounded like nonsense or whatever. Just by way of housekeeping too, I would like to say Renewed's programming keeps growing and growing. We're doing well. The next big, I just want to mention quickly, we've got a marketing roundtable coming up on January 14th after the holidays, and we've got a copywriting boot camp with Jim Sinkinson on the 19th and several days after that. We've got the events roundtable on January 20th. It's a great group, and then we'll do the next on the offense session on the 28th of January. So a little bit of break for the holidays, but a lot coming up in January as we continue to grow. So with that, first of all, Nick, so nice to see you again. I've missed you since we talked last about this session. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, David. That's lovely. And thank you for having me, by the way. It's a real pleasure to be here. Very, very flattering to be asked, and lovely to be able to participate in the Renewed community, because I think it's a fantastic community. I think what you guys are doing is just great. And I lurk a little bit in the Slack group, so I don't really participate as actively as perhaps I should there, but I do kind of keep an eye on what's going on, and it's a fantastic group. So lovely to be here.
Well, lurking is okay because you're providing leadership in other places, I guess. So, you can be a different person in each environment, which is a perfect lead into one of the things you said in the discussion that I feel like you kind of have to start with, because I found it inspirational, and I think everyone on the call will too. But literally at one point in the conversation, you were using the words courage and commitment, and your background has so focused on executing business plans during periods of transition, that sort of thing, that to hear you speak about courage and commitment during the COVID crisis and everything else was very empowering. And I think it has to do with the fact that you're seeing a lot of people maybe taking halfway steps as they look towards 2021. Could you start with that just a little bit, because I think that would be absolutely a great context setter.
I mean, absolutely. Let's spend some time on that. I mean, the reason I talk about courage to start with is I actually think that hard times and some of these difficult periods that we face now and have faced in the past are actually real kind of accelerators. So I overuse the phrase that I borrowed from Ben Evans. We've seen kind of 5 years evolution in 3 months, and I think that's true in a lot of cases. So I think we're seeing, certainly in the last 9 to 12 months, we've seen a real accelerated evolution away from towards digital and away from traditional advertising, for example. And so the reason we need to be courageous is we need to sort of think of those things as opportunities, and we really need to think as sort of quickly and in as innovative way as possible how to deal with some of those things, because there are always upsides, right? So what we've seen, thanks to politics and thanks to the pandemic, is another episodic flight to quality, flight to trusted information, flight to content that people are prepared actually to pay for, because they really just want to get to quality and get to trust. And so I think being courageous is really about jumping on those opportunities. And a lot of those opportunities, I think the common factor in my experience is the people who successfully deal with those challenges are the people that double down on focusing on the customer. So they will be the people who make changes to their organizations and operating models and strategies, really much more focusing in on customers rather than the way that they've perhaps been organized and positioned before. And that does require some courage, because it requires change. It can require difficult conversations. People, members of your teams and members of staff don't want to hear about restructure and repositioning of their teams. But actually, sometimes that's the first point of courage that is required, is to say, we're not aligned around the value we're really selling to our customers, and we're certainly not aligned around our customers. So I think that's something I'd really call out. And then the commitment piece. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Please.
And I think the commitment piece is about, once you have decided where you're going to go, so what are the things you're going to change? How are you going to react to the opportunities and the challenges around it? It's about properly committing to it. And David, when we spoke, something you said that was really interesting, I'm not going to give away the detail of what we spoke about, but you talked about a new initiative that your organization is working on, and you said, well, I hope it's going to work because I've dedicated X% of my team to that, and X% of my sales team to that. And the comment I think I made was, well, I can guarantee that if you hadn't dedicated those people, it wouldn't have worked. So I think what I would say to people, and these are conversations I've had with clients recently, is take this time to sort of revisit, regroup, decide what your focus is going to be, and then commit to it. Don't try and do innovative things, launching new products, differentiating products. Don't try and do that as just additions to people's daily workload. Make sure you are carving out teams. Make sure you are properly investing in whatever the project is you're doing to give it its best possible chance of success, and then be prepared to say, if it doesn't work, we move on. But don't try and sort of just do these things half-heartedly over a long period and hope that they work. Do them, commit, and be prepared to sort of step away from the things that don't quite work.
Yeah, it's interesting because I thought you were actually the one that had that idea. So it must have been a very simpatico conversation we were having. I was inside your head at that moment, Nick, I guess. But so I think starting with the organization chart, and if we are going to do things that are scalable and sustainable, which I think are the issues we're all struggling with right now, we've all pivoted, but is it sustainable? Is it scalable? The organization chart is the first place you need to be courageous, and so I think everyone on this call will take to heart your comment about don't try to make somebody fit in where they don't fit in, because you're not going to get a success right now. You have to be courageous. Would you broaden that mandate to like other parts of the business strategies, technology, all the other components that lead to success?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I would say there. First of all, is I would absolutely broaden that to sort of planning and execution. So invest in planning and execution. There's a show we have in the UK, which I think is in the US as well, called Grand Designs. Do people know what that is? It's about people sort of either building fancy houses or renovating houses, and it's kind of an interesting program. And probably about 50% of the episodes, the family that are doing the big grand design will say, we're not going to bother getting a project manager for this. We're going to manage it ourselves. And you can see, and I'm like yelling at the TV. You can see the presenter like kind of with his head in his hands, but thinking this is going to be a disaster, but also thinking this is going to make great TV. Because, sorry, long-winded, long story short, it will be a disaster if you do not put effort and expertise into the planning and execution of these things. So again, I quite often, my head in the hands moment in lots of places, big organizations and small, is somebody will be identified as key talent. There'll be, this is a great development opportunity. We'll ask so and so to project manage this new initiative as a development opportunity because they're key talent. And that is a terrible thing to do to someone that's on a sort of wonderful career trajectory, is to kind of load them with expectation and load them with a role that requires a very specific skill set that they might not have. So I'd say invest in that.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you asked about technology, and I think the technology piece is really interesting because I think there's almost a kind of perfect storm at the moment of sort of commercial drivers, regulatory drivers, and then technology that really facilitate quite a lot of innovation. So the commercial stuff is we've talked about and is fairly evident. Regulation like GDPR here and other similar pieces of regulation, the demise of the third-party cookie, could be seen as disasters. Actually, again, these are, in my opinion, accelerators because they force us as content owners and as media owners to understand our audiences better, audiences and users. We have to, we have no choice but to understand them better. And the good news is that the technology is really advancing so quickly that it's now much easier. There's a much lower barrier to entry to have the sort of technologies that allow fantastic analytics, fantastic identification of first-party user data, and also just things like paywall and sampling technology, paywall and reg wall technologies, which used to have to be really infrastructural and really hardwired into your tech stack, don't have to be anymore. So I think thinking of the people on this call, actually that's a massive opportunity to compete with the bigger players, because the bigger players probably do have these rather over-engineered, difficult to sort of update tech stacks, whereas you can go and buy this stuff and lease this stuff very, very quickly and easily, and that gives you a great opportunity to understand the audience better in terms of who they are, how they describe themselves, other things about them, so demographic, psychographic items, but also couple that with usage data and analytics. So it's kind of super exciting that those tools are available now.
Well, I completely agree with what you're saying. To some degree, I think those of us on this call have a market advantage because for years and years, above our heads, starting with Google on down, there have been information providers above us. And ironically, during COVID, that gap's only gotten bigger, which to some degrees is a competitive advantage for the rest of us because there's so much room to move in our niche markets with our specialization, to focus on quality, to figure out new distribution channels that are unique, all of those things. But it takes the courage because what we don't have is we don't have the capital. I don't think there are any public companies represented on this call at this moment. So we can't, call up the London Stock Exchange and have a bunch of people send us checks. It hasn't worked for me yet. I keep trying and they don't answer my phone calls. But so it does mean what you said at the top of this call is even more important. If you've evolved your business model, you've got to take the scarce resources you have and move them forcefully and clearly into a very well planned agenda. I think is that kind of your perception, Nick?
That's 100% right. And I think, and I sort of am very conscious when I talk to groups like this that, I come from sort of mostly big companies where they do have fairly well-established sort of strategy functions, and so what I'm not saying is that everybody should become, like a huge bureaucratic PLC or what have you. But what I like is the concept of sort of minimum viable framework. So I think it is always incredibly useful to look at frameworks and a bit of structure to properly capture and articulate the strategy and the direction of travel. Because then you can get out of the way. Then the good news
Yeah.
is you can actually sort of align the people that need to actually make this happen,
Yeah.
and not fall into the trap of a bunch of the most senior people in an organization of any size, sort of in the micro detail of
Yeah.
execution. But what I like about these frameworks is you set direction of travel and outcomes and ownership, and then you trust people to
Yeah.
get going on that.
Yeah. Well, if you do that, I, and part of the interesting discussion we had, the initial time is, I mean, I think what you're talking about is more of a revolutionary approach to 2021 than an evolutionary approach. And also a warning that if you try to be evolutionary, the risks are higher now. But one area in particular you focused on that I think was, again, very inspirational to me was, and particularly given your background at Informa and, and elsewhere, you've seen this play out so many times, but in this new environment now, you mentioned some differentiations on product positioning, product differentiation, and what I sort of call launching a division rather than launching a product. If you're going to evolve, plan for something that's scalable. That's the only way you're going to solve this. So product, sales, marketing, product differentiation, what are you seeing there that's helpful?
I think, well, thank you for reminding me of that. I mean, the one thing I would say is a bit of a slogan of mine, but a truism as well is nothing is one size fits all anymore.
Yeah.
And I think, I would really, going back to some of the points we made about, the technology being more available and more affordable to really understand users is the gateway to understanding actually that, a one size fits all product is probably leaving money on the table. And at best, and at worst, it's probably introducing a huge amount of risk.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and what I mean by that, I have to be a little bit vague about this because some of the stuff hasn't been launched yet. But a company I've worked at recently, we spent a lot of time really understanding the audience better. So rather than thinking about demographics, just sort of fairly basic demographics about education, earnings, other sort of very measurable things, we got much more into the psychograph, and we got much more into understanding archetypes from the perspective of motivations and really the emotional stuff. Why people wanted to read and engage with the brand that I'm sort of tiptoeing around. And what we realized is there's a product that's existed for a very long time. There is a group of people who are engaged with sort of on the sort of the free end of things, who will never go as far as paying, or certainly won't go in one step all the way to paying full price, but would pay for a subset. So we got into a really interesting discussion about, okay, so is that a skinny product or is that a sampling product? Is it a stepping stone? Is it a trial? We got to the point of saying, actually, this is one of those decisions that you just have to be courageous and say, let's try it as a skinny product, and if it doesn't work, we'll think about that later. So we got into the sort of opportunity of, okay, so we're leaving money on the table because there's a bunch of people who want less, but will pay less for it. But the other side of that, which was really exciting, and I got really overexcited about, was we actually found when we did the research, there was a bunch of people who would pay more if we gave them more. And this bunch of people are young, very fast moving professionals who are prepared to invest in their careers, who are prepared to invest in their own development, who have a certain amount of disposable income, the type of people that would pay, serious money. Yes, they could be an obese product indeed. Thank you. The type of,
Yeah.
I do like the digital heckling. That's brilliant.
Suzanne, that's great. Yeah,
That's
sorry.
super.
Sorry for
No,
the
indeed.
non-PC there.
I think we were going to call it something like professional rather than obese, but or full fat maybe. But so there was that sense of there was an unmet need. There was a group of people who would pay, and we did this. We did some pretty robust research to demonstrate that their expectations of a monthly expenditure on a product that had the additional value that we were talking about, they would pay more for. So that's super exciting, right? So you're kind of both sides of the equation. There's opportunity and upside, and the kind of exciting news is, yes, the bigger product might have required some development. Of course, the skinny product didn't really require any new stuff to be created. It was a filter on the product. So, you're kind of, as an opportunity there to create more value in a different way without actually having to sort of hire a bunch of new people to create content.
I think there's so many things packed into what you just said, Nick, that and all of them are avenues that we could talk about. And I know several of the people who are on this call have had similar experiences to what you just described, where they tried to find a gateway into their product mix and ended up with the high-end, higher price version for a market they didn't yet have. So I looking at who's on this call, I can see at least 4 people I know who have seen that happen in their own worlds, to repeat what you're saying. So maybe I would just start out with something, and then we can open it up to general questions, because it was one of the other points we talked about that I found very interesting, which was, I think what you're describing is you make this courageous commitment to strategic efforts, and you're very conscious, increasingly conscious about your planning effort, that the effect you may have is to widen the spectrum of your offerings, and so you may be increasing your price points, on both ends, from the lowest to the highest, and you may have parts of the organization that start to look even more B2C, and then on the high end, like very small niche, so you're like, as a product differentiation strategy, is that kind of what you're saying? Because I know you've seen that convergence in that area, and maybe that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. As we discussed previously, and they're kind of, B2B and B2C are kind of converging and diverging at the same time, which is a kind of confusing thing to say. But I think the simplest way of describing that is, when you have media companies that have a B2B and a B2C offering, the really important thing is to start trialing, exposing both sides of the offering in each other. So, a classic example, would be, if you do have a data offering and more of a news type offering, you should always be showcasing data in, visualizations, charts, and reports, what have you, in the news product. That's a sort of very sort of straightforward one, because the stating the obvious, but the people who are probably buying and reading your B2C product are the potential users, the decision makers, and maybe even the ultimate budget holders for the B2B products. So the more you can sort of blur that and really make it feel like more of a continuum of just your value to that individual is on the personal side, but also increasingly on enabling them to have more impact at work. I think that's really important. Which sort of leads into the second part of that, which is B2B sales needs to become a lot more around the emotional side. So I think yes, there needs to be a sort of tangible value exchange. Yes, there needs to be, if at all possible, some sort of sense of ROI. You invest in our B2B product, and here's the type of returns you can expect. But fundamentally, you're still selling to human beings. You're still thinking about how you can help that individual. I suppose the example I give, one of the startups I'm working with, not through Collingwood, but individually, is in the talent space, and it's talking about connecting talent to organizations based on values and purpose. And it's really interesting. HR directors, CHROs, and talent people are in this really interesting space now, where organizations are looking to them to do more than they've done ever before. They understand that talent is such an important thing. They understand that values and purpose are probably the most important things in the workforce going forward. And so the conversations that startup is having is so much more about how to help position these people. How does our product help you deliver on that agenda that your CEO has laid out? So sort of getting into that mindset of, yes, it's a business product, but actually you're selling it to individuals and you're helping those individuals be better at their jobs, make more of a contribution to the organization. So how can you sort of think about the positioning of the product that way, I think. So it's, membership is a great example of that, right? So, memberships, which you might sell to the organization, but they help individuals in that organization personally develop, supports those people individually, but of course, those people, by being supported and developing, are ultimately contributing more to the organizations and the organization benefits. So I like that sort of blurring of how you sell a product like that.
Well, I think when you just think of the implications, say, in your sales and marketing structure for that kind of approach, it calls on different sets of skills. And as I said, one of the small things we're doing in our earlier discussion, I mentioned this. We were fortunate. We have a very small sales department, but we're fortunate enough to have one person who had a background in big ticket tech sales to big companies. So, that skill set that we happen to have allowed us to do the kind of B2B part of what you're describing in that converging, but if we hadn't had that person and we tried, going back to your courage and commitment, and we tried with somebody else, I don't know if we'll succeed, but I guarantee that we'll fail, as you said. And I think, if there's one takeaway, it's, this is not a period for the timid. All of us need to, commit to what we're trying to do, recognize if it's not working, get out fast, even faster than we have in the past. I think that's a very strong thing. Would you, there's besides Suzanne's humorous chat comment about renaming our product strategies, there's also, I kind of open it up to if people have questions they want to raise their hands with or type in, we can go there. But but you have so much experience in execution, and you did mention minimal viable product framework. Suzanne picked up on that. Has a lot of us are familiar with that, but I think even that's changed in this environment a little bit. Could you maybe speak to that one a bit and what you're seeing?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I mean, there's two things. One is about strategic planning, and one is about execution, as you point out. So the strategic planning thing is really just, nobody likes big strategy documents. Nobody likes writing a strategy document that feels like it's a report to send to someone up the line, which actually in a lot of big organizations it is. So strategy, minimum viable strategy documents really need to be, five PowerPoint slides, 10 max. Yeah. But you've got to be able to capture the essence of your market, your customer, your product, and your competition, and then what does that mean in terms of initiatives as a result of that? That might not be perfect. I kind of made that up as I was saying it, but yeah, that's an example of the kind of chunks you would want to break that out into. Yeah. But then when it comes to execution of that, I think it's much more about empowering the team to deliver. So something that we created at the Economist, which went pretty well, I think, was a playbook. So rather than creating, a sort of big document and sort of a secret strategy document or a massive kind of huge 500-page tome, we created a playbook of this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and just got that out there so that people were actually able to look at. The way I described it was sort of principles and prohibitions, so kind of guide rails, rather than here's a detailed how you do things, and here's every possible eventuality we might come up with. It was much more principles based, and it was much more here's where we're going, here are the outcomes we're looking for, here's pretty much how we think we're going to get there, and here's who you should talk to. So I think that trying to codify things in too much detail, trying to sort of predict the future too much is a waste of time. but trying to get a sense of this is how we get there, and these are the ways we want to run the business. It's so powerful and so empowering for people, and then the leadership can sort of kind of get out of the way a little, which is really important.
That's probably the most important thing right now, because
trust.
Because I can, you know, I think many of us on this call will have had the experience, and Nick, I know you probably have too, where you've got your 7-slide PowerPoint thing about here's the plan, and you've got probably, you know, 5 or 10 of the most important people in your company in the room, and there's dead air, and you sort of know at that moment that I mean, hopefully you have the wisdom to realize, you know, to use a 1960s US NASA, you know, Houston, we've got a problem kind of situation. You're not even, you're not that far into it, and you can see just a complete lack of excitement. So it does either take courage to say, no, this is what we have to do, but we need to adjust the team more clearly, or just be really nimble at the consensus building to say, okay, what's wrong with this? What's more exciting, so you can get to something, because none of us have 6 months to sit around and try to sort this stuff out right now. We need to be acting now, and particularly if we're trying to guess what 2021 will look like, right?
I think consensus building is a fantastic term and mindset, and I think there's a great book called Sprint, and I can't remember the name of the authors, which is really bad. I will let you know later. But that's all about how you can really rapidly ideate and experiment. But the two things that resonate from what you said that reminded me of that book is it's about getting your brightest and your best in the room for that 7-slide, to help create and test that 7-slide strategy. But at a certain point in their methodology, you do appoint a decider. So yes, it's about getting consensus, but there will be a deciding vote. There will be, you know, that's probably the CEO in the case of most people on this call, right? So it's brilliant people on this call. So yes, it's about consensus, but sometimes it's about, okay, agree to disagree, commit, and move on. So that's a book worth, you know, and I think they've probably done their fair share of talks on YouTube that you can find. That's worth looking at. But I think the other thing that I think people overlook is about objectives and incentives. So, you know, especially in the bigger organizations, you know, when you do employee engagement surveys, that, you know, you always hear, we're not paid enough, we don't understand the strategy, and you know, probably a couple of things about, you know, the offices smell and whatever. Sorry, so sort of totally.
No,
I think employee engagement surveys are very important, by the way.
We've never had that.
I may not sound like
surgeries that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. It's the Sprint book is by Jake Knapp, and it's in the chat. Well worth looking at. Where was I before I offended HR people the world over? Yes. So connection to the strategy. That's the point I was going to make. So connection to the strategy is about that kind of selling it. It's about that getting people in the room and involved. But it's about objectives and incentives. And I'm a massive fan of OKRs. Again, if people aren't familiar with the concept, it's well worth looking up. OKRs are really ways of connecting people to very big, high-level objectives. But you start with that, and then you can roll out everybody's objectives and incentives into those very big objective key results. So again, that's a really lovely minimum viable framework way of basically saying everybody in this organization, if you stop them in the corridor or stop them on a Zoom call nowadays and ask them, you know, what are you doing and why does that matter, should have an idea of how what they're doing, what they're incentivized on actually contributes towards the strategy, if you get that right. You know.
Yeah. Could you, the other part of this, if you execute the strategy and well, I guess you could say it's a little bit intimidating in this environment, because it feels like there's even less known than there has been, and we're already 10 months into changing much of what we've done. So there's a little bit of fear involved in that, which I think psychologically, talking to you can help us all overcome, get back to our strengths a little bit. So thank you for that. But I also think there's, as you said right at the top of the call, there's the energy of opportunity. If we recall that we have been through crises before, and we've evolved our businesses, profoundly over, partially as a result of the crises in the past, but partially because we've all been staying current with what's happening in the information industry. So I think on that basis, we've all got a certain amount of nimbleness. We've all got a certain amount of organization and strategic focus built in. I think what you're just saying is now you've got to be, now's the time to be precise and strong about that. This is not a time to lose your focus and be unclear. And you got to, all the things about organizational development and strategic placement, put them in place. Let's assume that we execute at that point. Another thing I know you're really interested in, you've talked about, is the last part, which is the go-to-market, the distribution strategy part. It's a different world out there. Based on the work you're doing now and what you've done in the past, do you see, we've the PowerPoint slides, everybody's in love. They're all jumping up and down on the Zoom call and stuff like that. Now we got to go outside, and it gets really, the wheels start to come off. What are you seeing, Nick? And any advice you can give us?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I love the term go-to-market because I think it's cohesive, and it brings together a sense of everybody facing the market, and not, what I don't like are terms like marketing strategy and sales plan and this and the other, because actually it's much more honest and realistic and powerful nowadays to actually say it's a more holistic plan that involves everybody across the organization. I think the way I think of it is, I think of old publishing workflows and digital publishing workflows, and how engagement with the customer used to be this linear process of creating content, marketing it, selling it, sending it, and maybe somehow supporting it in this linear process. And then you just pivot that all around, and suddenly, as soon as you're digital, you're doing all of those things at the same time. You're all facing the customer at the same time. So what I would say, one of my biggest lessons, and one of the things I always talk about is, go to market starts kind of before you create the product, right? So go to market starts when you're ideating. It starts when you are talking to those 5 key customers that will give you 85% of the insight. That came from Jacob Nielsen years ago, and has just been proven again and again. You don't have to do sort of super massive research projects. You don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with consultants. Talk to 5 customers and you will hear 85% of the feedback you need to hear about your idea, about your concept, about the problems that you are trying to address. I mean, they shouldn't be 5 random people off the street. They need to be 5 pretty well-chosen people. But if they are well-chosen people, they will give you so much. So go-to-market, first of all, starts there. It's about really focusing on the problems you're solving, and getting your champions in early, getting evangelists in the market who have been involved in the ideation and the creation of the product very early on. And I would say so many organizations sort of start with an idea internally. They get super excited about it. They talk about it. They talk themselves up to a level of excitement. And they start building it. And then at some point they start asking customers, is it a good idea? And I think that's, that is a mistake that organizations of all sizes make, is, have that conversation much, much earlier.
Yeah. Well, I hope that's relevant to everyone on the call, because it's certainly, Nick, when you say that, it's like a gift from my point of view, because I think the instinct is, you're trying to make these moves and you hear somebody say, well, let's survey this group and this group and this group, and you can just feel the, to continue with my automobile image, you can feel the air coming out of the tires. The wheels aren't falling off yet here. You're just slowly sinking, you
It's
know,
getting a bit
and
flabby, is it?
whereas, you know, get on the phone with, your 2 or 3 of the people who are kind of your thought leaders in your market, and I don't know if it's 85 or 90 or 75%, but you'll know immediately. So that's very encouraging. Could
I think actually, just to interrupt you, David, sorry to interrupt. There's another little maxim I like, which is, and make sure you're actually talking to the right customer. So I grew up in STM and then B2B, and I spent a lot of time talking to gatekeepers about what they thought end users wanted. And you get some pretty skewed audience insights by talking to an information professional or a librarian or a purchasing person about what their end users need. So just be double. The slightly difficult thing about that is they are typically the more responsive and vocal people. So you've got a kind of absolute bias creeping in, which is those types of gatekeepers are very used to giving feedback to information providers, and they're quite happy to do it. So you just have to kind of make sure that the mix is right.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That can, I also noticed that we've got a comment on
Yes.
well, I have to appreciate Mark Zebarth, who always who teaches business classes and is questioning whether or not the goal is to be Tesla or Theranos. I don't know if that's is that worthy of an answer? I think I know the answer, but I'm not sure it's either of those. I think
it's neither. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'd like to be, David Foster and Nick Fallon, I think maybe, but Mark, thank you for posing that philosophical question about which version.
But I think there's a serious question in there,
Yeah.
which is the fail fast piece, and yes, absolutely. I think that very much, I would say pick a smaller number of bets, make those bets, commit to those bets, but be very prepared to review and fail with your head held high quickly. I mean, I think that's super important. So I am kind of saying failing fast is a good idea, but I'm not drinking all of the Kool-Aid of Silicon Valley per se.
Yeah. Well, there's so much more we talk about, but we've hit 11:40 or 45 past the hour, right on the nose. With I think your last comment, such a strong one. I think wisdom calls for leave on that note, because I think that's kind of the takeaway right there, and also recognizing that this renewed group has done so many things since it got created. But one of the things is that we're all immediately in touch with each other. So I'll repeat the fact that there's not a person on this call who you can't get on the Slack channel and touch, as far as what are you doing? What's your reaction? And Nick's hugely available and a joy to talk to. So
absolutely. Please feel free to reach out if you've got questions, comments. If you think anything I said was absolute nonsense, I'd like to hear that too.
I've been taking notes on that, mostly.
Okay, you can send me the nonsense list later.
Yeah, okay. Mostly vis-a-vis my own plans, nonsense is the kindest word that I've written down, I should say. So with that, Nick, you're a joy, and thank you for trying to think about the big issues that inform all of the small and medium and big decisions we're all trying to make right now. And obviously the discussion can also continue on the innovation channel, on the Slack channel, as Ed has pointed out, and please keep the dialogue going. The more we talk together, the better we're all going to do. And we have, as the big get bigger, we have this market space to ourselves. It's ours to control. So let's take advantage of that. Going back to the very top, as Nick said, it's an opportunity. So keep that in mind as you do your planning stuff. Best wishes to everyone. Nick, You're
you.
incredible. Thank you so much for your
Well,
energy.
you are
and
too
good spirit.
kind, but thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you very much for having me, and
yeah.
to everyone for listening. It was a lot of fun, as we said it would be, David.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I look forward to a lot more. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, everybody.